There are cities that once burned with such brightness that their founders believed they would outlive generations, outlast economic cycles, and stand untouched by time itself. They were built in confidence, financed in euphoria, and celebrated as proof that prosperity could be engineered, extracted, or conquered. And yet today, wind moves through their streets without resistance. Windows gape open to dust. Staircases lead to nothing. The silence that remains is not empty, it is historical. It carries within it the story of ambition, calculation, and the fragile foundation upon which extraordinary wealth was once built. In the high desert east of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the town of Bodie rose from obscurity in the late 19th century to become one of the most profitable gold mining communities in the American West. Peru. After a major discovery in 1876, industrial-scale mining transformed what had been a minor prospecting camp into a roaring boomtown. By 1879, Bodie's population surged to between 7,000 and 10,000 residents. The town supported dozens of saloons, luxury hotels, newspapers, gambling halls, and a stock exchange that handled enormous flows of capital tied to mining shares. Contemporary reports described bullion shipments, worth millions of dollars in 19th century currency, leaving the district annually. Investors from San Francisco and beyond poured money into Bodie's mines, convinced that the ore bodies running beneath the hills were deep, stable, and inexhaustible. The architecture of Bodie reflected not elegance but urgency. Buildings were constructed quickly, wooden storefronts, boarding houses, banks, each one a response to demand, rather than a vision of permanence. And yet for a time, permanence felt real. The Standard Company's stamp mill processed vast quantities of ore, and technological innovations in extraction reinforced the belief that human engineering could overcome geological limits. But gold is a finite promise. By the 1880s and 1890s, production declined, ore quality fell, operating costs rose. Investors redirected capital elsewhere. What had once been a magnet for migration became a place people quietly prepared to leave. Fires damaged large portions of the town in 1892 and again in 1932, accelerating abandonment. By the mid-20th century, Bodie had become a near-frozen relic, preserved not by intention, but by the speed and totality of its collapse. Across the Atlantic and deep into the Namib Desert, another city experienced a similar arc of meteoric ascent and stark abandonment. Kolmanskop was founded after diamonds were discovered in 1908 in what was then German Southwest Africa. Within months, mining concessions were organized under German colonial authority, and a restricted diamond zone was established. Kolmanskop rapidly transformed into one of the wealthiest settlements on the African continent. The town boasted electric lighting, a hospital equipped with advanced medical technology for its time, including one of the earliest X-ray units in the Southern Hemisphere, an opera house, a casino, and grand villas modeled after Wilhelmine German architecture. Life in Kolmanskop was shaped by imported luxury. Ice was shipped in from abroad. Champagne flowed at formal dances. The desert, however, never retreated. It simply waited. The town's prosperity depended entirely on surface-level diamond deposits, which were initially so abundant that stones could reportedly be picked up from the sand. But geology does not respect optimism. By the 1920s, richer diamond fields were discovered farther south near the Orange River. Investment shifted accordingly. Workers followed the capital. The infrastructure that once symbolized European modernity in Africa became financially unsustainable. By 1956, Kolmanskop was effectively abandoned. Sand began to pour through broken windows and beneath door frames, gradually filling ballrooms and bedrooms alike, transforming luxury into a sculpture of erosion. If Bodie and Kolmanskop were victims of finite extraction, Centralia reveals a different dimension of economic fragility. One rooted not in depletion, but in unintended consequence. Centralia was a modest but stable coal mining town in Pennsylvania, sustained by anthracite deposits that powered industrial America. For decades, mining provided employment, identity, and municipal revenue. Churches. In 1962, a fire ignited in a landfill pit and spread into exposed coal seams beneath the town. What might have seemed manageable soon proved otherwise. The underground fire extended into interconnected mine tunnels, where it found oxygen, fuel, and continuity. Attempts to extinguish it failed. Over time, the fire spread beneath residential neighborhoods, releasing carbon monoxide and destabilizing the ground above. Sinkholes opened. Pavement cracked. Government studies confirmed that the blaze could burn for decades, possibly centuries. In the 1980s, the state of Pennsylvania initiated a relocation program, compensating residents and condemning property. One by one, homes were demolished. Centralia did not collapse economically before its abandonment. It was evacuated in the shadow of an environmental disaster, born from its own industrial foundation. Then there is Plymouth, once the vibrant capital of the Caribbean island of Montserrat. Unlike mining towns built on extraction, Plymouth's wealth was administrative, commercial, and symbolic. As the governmental and economic center of a British overseas territory, it hosted banks, legal offices, schools, and a busy harbor. Its colonial architecture faced the sea with quiet assurance. For decades, the city functioned as the stable heart of the island's civic life. That stability ended in 1995, when the Soufriere Hills volcano began a prolonged eruption sequence. Pyroclastic flows and ashfall intensified over the next 2 years. By 1997, catastrophic eruptions buried large sections of Plymouth beneath layers of volcanic debris. Entire districts were rendered uninhabitable. Government functions relocated northward. The once prosperous capital became a restricted exclusion zone, its buildings partially entombed, its streets erased. Unlike the gradual financial decline of mining towns, Plymouth's abandonment was swift, driven by geologic force rather than market contraction. Wealth could not negotiate with magma. What binds these cities together is not simply that they were abandoned, but that each represented a moment when prosperity appeared structurally secure. In Bodie, it was industrial gold extraction. In Kolmanskop, colonial diamond monopolies. In Centralia, coal-fired industrialization. In Plymouth, administrative centrality and maritime trade. In each case, residents invested not only money, but belief that growth would continue, that risk was manageable, that infrastructure equaled permanence. Yet history demonstrates that prosperity concentrated around a single pillar resource. Geography, political function contains within it a point of failure. When that pillar weakens, the architecture of confidence begins to fracture. Banks close. Workers depart. Governments issue evacuation orders. And eventually, absence replaces noise. The wealthiest abandoned cities are not merely ruins. They are economic documents written in brick, timber, and concrete. They record cycles of speculation, extraction, governance, and environmental reckoning. They reveal how quickly financial gravity can shift, how decisively nature can intervene, and how communities, no matter how affluent, remain vulnerable to forces larger than their balance sheets. In the next chapter of this story, we will travel further into the world of vanished wealth, examining cities that were not only prosperous, but architecturally monumental urban landscapes that once embodied imperial ambition, speculative finance, and industrial power on a scale so vast that their abandonment reshaped entire regions. To understand why they were left behind, we must examine the political decisions, global market shifts, and environmental thresholds that transformed thriving capitals into permanent voids. If the first great wave of abandoned wealth was born from gold veins and diamond fields, the second emerged from something far more complex and volatile: geopolitics, nuclear ambition, militarized borders, and the architecture of modern industry. These were not rough mining camps thrown together in urgency. They were planned environments: resorts, model industrial cities, strategic urban hubs built with state backing, international investment, and the implicit promise that modernity itself would protect them. Yet in the 20th century, the illusion of permanence would once again fracture, sometimes overnight. On the eastern coast of Cyprus, the district of Varosha once stood as one of the most glamorous seaside destinations in the Mediterranean. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Varosha, part of the city of Famagusta, became synonymous with prosperity. Luxury high-rise hotels lined the beachfront. International celebrities vacationed there. Tourism revenue poured into the Cypriot economy, and developers raced to construct modernist towers that signaled the island's arrival on the global leisure map. Varosha was not speculative in the sense of a mining rush. It was structurally integrated into international travel networks and supported by sustained foreign investment. Everything changed in 1974. Following a coup d'état in Cyprus, backed by the Greek military junta, Turkey launched a military intervention, citing the protection of Turkish Cypriots. As Turkish forces advanced toward Famagusta, residents of Varosha fled, expecting to return within days. They never did. The area was fenced off by the Turkish military and declared a restricted zone. Hotels remained furnished. Shops were left stocked. Apartments retained personal belongings. Unlike cities emptied by economic decline, Varosha froze in time under armed guard. For decades, it remained uninhabited, its skyline decaying in full view of the sea that once fueled its wealth. Here, abandonment was not geological or financial. It was geopolitical, a city suspended in unresolved sovereignty. Thousands of miles to the north, in Soviet Ukraine, another city symbolized a different vision of state-backed prosperity. Pripyat was founded in 1970 to house workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was a model Soviet city-wide boulevards, modern apartment blocks, cultural centers, schools, and recreational facilities. With a population nearing 50,000 by 1986, Pripyat represented the technological optimism of late Soviet industrial planning. Nuclear energy was presented as safe, efficient, and emblematic of scientific progress. The city's residents were engineers, technicians, and families who believed they were participating in the future of energy. On April 26, 1986, Reactor No. 4 at the Chernobyl plant exploded during a safety test gone catastrophically wrong. The explosion released massive amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Initially, residents of Pripyat were not informed of the full extent of the disaster. 36 hours later, buses arrived, and evacuation was ordered. Citizens were told they would be gone for only a few days. They left possessions behind: documents, clothing, toys trusting in the state's reassurance. They would never return permanently. Pripyat became part of an exclusion zone, contaminated by radiation levels, too dangerous for habitation. In this case, abandonment was tied to technological hubris and systemic secrecy, a chain of decisions that transformed a thriving urban experiment into a permanent monument to industrial catastrophe. If Pripyat embodied nuclear ambition, Hiroshima Island, often called Gunkanjima or Battleship Island, represented the peak of industrial density. Located off the coast of Nagasaki, Hiroshima was developed by Mitsubishi in the late 19th century as an undersea coal mining facility. By the mid-20th century, it was one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Concrete apartment blocks rose directly from the sea, forming a fortress-like silhouette. The island contained schools, shops, hospitals, and communal baths. Coal extracted beneath the seabed fueled Japan's rapid industrialization and wartime expansion. But as Japan transitioned from coal to petroleum in the 1960s, Hiroshima's strategic importance diminished. In 1974, Mitsubishi officially closed the mines. Within weeks, the island was emptied. Unlike cities abandoned due to disaster or war, Hiroshima was vacated because global energy markets shifted. An entire urban ecosystem, vertical, compressed, self-contained, ceased to function once its economic rationale disappeared. Buildings that once symbolized modern engineering now stand hollow, battered by salt air and typhoons, illustrating how even highly organized industrial wealth can evaporate under macroeconomic change. Further west, in the South Caucasus, the city of Agdam offers a stark example of abandonment through prolonged conflict. Before the First Nagorno-Karabakh War, in the early 1990s, Agdam was a thriving Azerbaijani city with tens of thousands of residents, a railway connection, factories, and cultural institutions. During the conflict between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces, Agdam was captured and subsequently largely destroyed. Its population fled. Buildings were stripped for materials. For nearly 3 decades, Agdam remained effectively a ghost city within a militarized landscape, its skeletal structures standing as evidence of unresolved territorial dispute. Here, prosperity was undone by war, and absence became embedded in diplomatic stalemate. What unites Varosha, Pripyat, Hiroshima, and Agdam is not simply their abandonment, but the scale of confidence that preceded it. These were not marginal settlements. They were integrated into national strategies, tourism development, nuclear modernization, industrial extraction, territorial control. Their infrastructures were robust, their economies systematized, their populations stable. Yet each was vulnerable to a specific axis of instability: military intervention, technological failure, energy transition, armed conflict. In examining these cities, we confront a deeper pattern. Wealth concentrated within a single structural framework, whether political, technological, or industrial, remains exposed to sudden systemic rupture. When the supporting framework collapses, urban life cannot simply pause. It unravels. Evacuation orders are issued. Borders harden. Radiation lingers. Markets redirect capital. And within weeks or months, streets that once carried traffic fall silent. There is also a psychological dimension to these abandonments. Residents rarely perceive them if earlier abandoned cities were built upon gold, coal, nuclear ambition, or geopolitical strategy. The next wave emerged from something less visible, yet equally powerful: financial engineering, speculative optimism, and state-planned visions of the future that outpaced demographic reality. These were cities conceived not from accidental discovery, but from deliberate design. Master plans were drafted. Infrastructure was laid in advance. Towers rose before residents arrived. In each case, wealth was projected forward, anticipated, modeled, promised long before it materialized. And when belief faltered, entire urban landscapes stood exposed. In Inner Mongolia, northern China, the district of Kangbashi was envisioned in the early 2000s as a modern administrative and cultural center for the resource-rich city of Ordos. Fueled by coal revenues and aggressive municipal investment, local authorities embarked on an ambitious construction program. Government complexes, museums, theaters, residential towers, and vast public squares were built at extraordinary speed. The architecture was bold, contemporary, even monumental. The assumption was clear: prosperity from mining would translate into population growth, urban migration, and sustained real estate demand. For a time, Ordos was one of China's wealthiest cities per capita due to coal production. Land sales generated enormous revenue for local government. Developers responded with high-density housing projects, priced beyond the reach of many ordinary citizens. Yet the expected influx of permanent residents did not immediately arrive. By the early 2010s, international media described Kangbashi as a ghost city, highlighting empty boulevards and sparsely occupied apartment blocks. Although the area has gradually gained population over time, the early years exposed a critical vulnerability in state-driven urban expansion. When real estate functions more as an investment vehicle than as housing demand, occupancy becomes secondary to speculation. The emptiness of Kangbashi was not caused by disaster or war, but by a mismatch between projected growth and lived demographic reality. Several decades earlier, in the Brazilian Amazon, an industrial experiment unfolded that revealed a similar overconfidence. Planning, though under very different political circumstances. Fordlandia was established in 1928 by American industrialist Henry Ford as a rubber plantation and company town intended to secure a domestic supply of latex for automobile tires. Fordlandia was designed as a model American-style community transplanted into the rainforest. It included housing, hospitals, schools, and strict social codes governing worker behavior. The town was not simply an economic venture, it was an ideological project, reflecting Ford's belief in moral discipline, industrial order, and cultural transplantation. Yet ecological and social realities undermined the plan. Rubber trees planted in dense, plantation-style rows proved highly susceptible to disease and pests, unlike their dispersed natural growth in the wild. Local workers resisted strict American labor regulations and dietary restrictions. Logistical challenges mounted. By the mid-1930s, large-scale production had failed to meet expectations. Eventually, the project was abandoned in favor of alternative rubber sources and synthetic materials. Fordlandia did not collapse overnight. It withered under biological miscalculation and cultural misunderstanding. The infrastructure remained, but the economic rationale dissolved. In southern Europe, the 2008 global financial crisis exposed another dimension of urban overreach. In Southeast Asia, the capital of Myanmar, Naypyidaw, presents a more ambiguous case. Officially designated as the country's capital in 2005, Naypyidaw was constructed with wide multi-lane highways, expansive government complexes, and designated zones for ministries, embassies, and residential districts. The relocation from Yangon was abrupt and largely unexplained publicly. The city's scale and sparse population led observers to question its necessity. While Naypyidaw is not abandoned, its vastness relative to its population underscores a recurring theme. Urban infrastructure can be built ahead of social density, creating landscapes that feel incomplete or hollow. The city reflects centralized planning, operating without organic urban growth. Across these cases, a shared pattern emerges. Unlike mining towns that rose spontaneously around resources, these cities were deliberate creations of political or corporate strategy. They were financed through credit systems, state revenue, or corporate capital. Their planners relied on forecasts, population growth projections, commodity price stability, industrial demand curves. When those forecasts faltered, the built environment remained as a physical testament to miscalculation. The abandonment or underutilization of such spaces reveals a subtle but profound shift in how wealth operates. In earlier centuries, prosperity was extracted physically from the ground. In the modern era, prosperity is often modeled financially before it exists materially. Real estate values rise based on expectation. Infrastructure is justified by predicted flows of people and capital. When expectations diverge from reality, the gap can leave behind empty towers, silent terminals, or experimental towns reclaimed by climate. The psychological dimension here differs from the mining camps of the 19th century. In Bodhi or Kalmanskup, residents could see the mines declining. In Pripyat, catastrophe was visible in the reactor's aftermath. But in speculative urban projects, decline often begins invisibly in spreadsheets, bond markets, commodity futures, or demographic reports. By the time physical emptiness becomes visible, financial retreat has already occurred. These cities challenge the assumption that abandonment must follow visible disaster. Sometimes it follows a recalibration of confidence. Investors withdraw. Governments redirect funds. Industries pivot. The buildings remain, but the narrative of inevitability evaporates. As we move into the next phase of this exploration, we will examine ancient cities, whose wealth once rose long before industrial speculation, colonial extraction, or nuclear ambition. The ancient world produced cities of staggering wealth, urban centers, so powerful that they anchored empires, redirected trade routes, and shaped the spiritual imagination of entire civilizations. Their abandonment did not occur within news cycles or financial quarters. It unfolded across decades, sometimes centuries, through environmental strain, political fragmentation, invasion, disease, and the slow recalibration of economic gravity. Yet their ruins, no less than those of modern ghost cities, testify to a single enduring truth: no concentration of wealth is immune to disruption. In the Roman Empire, few cities embodied prosperity as vividly as Pompeii. Located near the Bay of Naples, Pompeii flourished as a commercial hub, connected by maritime trade and fertile agricultural land, enriched by volcanic soil. Villas adorned with frescoes, bathhouses, theaters, bakeries, and markets reflected a vibrant urban economy integrated into the imperial system. Wealth circulated not only through aristocratic estates, but through everyday commerce: wine exports, garum production, artisanal goods. By the 1st century CE, Pompeii was a fully developed Roman city, with paved streets, aqueduct-fed fountains, and political institutions embedded in imperial governance. Its destruction in 79 CE, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, was swift and catastrophic. Pyroclastic surges buried the city under meters of ash and pumice. Unlike cities that declined gradually, Pompeii was sealed almost instantaneously, preserving buildings, inscriptions, and even human forms in volcanic sediment. Yet even here, the catastrophe reveals structural vulnerability. Roman expansion, infrastructure, and wealth could not anticipate geological force. Pompeii's prosperity had been built partly upon the very volcanic landscape that ultimately destroyed it. Fertility and fatality were intertwined. Further east, in Southeast Asia, the Khmer capital centered around Angkor stood for centuries as one of the largest pre-industrial urban complexes in the world. Anchored by monumental temple architecture, such as Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, the city was supported by an intricate hydraulic system of reservoirs, canals, and embankments designed to manage monsoon cycles and sustain rice agriculture. Between the 9th and 15th centuries, Angkor functioned as the political, religious, and economic heart of the Khmer Empire. Its scale suggests a population in the hundreds of thousands, supported by agricultural surplus and regional trade networks. But Angkor's decline was gradual and multifaceted. Paleoclimatic studies indicate prolonged droughts alternating with intense monsoon flooding in the 14th and 15th centuries, placing strain on the hydraulic infrastructure. At the same time, shifts in regional trade toward maritime routes reduced the relative importance of inland agrarian capitals. Political pressures from neighboring kingdoms, particularly Ayutthaya, compounded instability. By the 15th century, the royal court relocated southward. Angkor was not obliterated in a single event. It was gradually absorbed by forest and time, its stone towers surviving while wooden urban districts vanished. The city's abandonment illustrates how environmental stress and geopolitical realignment can slowly undermine even the most sophisticated urban systems. In South Asia, Mohenjo-Daro offers another lens into ancient urban wealth and disappearance. Flourishing around 2500 BC, as part of the Indus Valley civilization, Mohenjo-Daro featured advanced urban planning, grid-pattern streets, standardized brick construction, drainage systems, and public baths. Trade connections extended across the Arabian Sea to Mesopotamia. Artifacts indicate economic organization, craft specialization, and administrative coordination. This was not a marginal settlement, but a mature, complex urban society. Yet by around 1900 BCE, the Indus urban centers entered decline. Scholars across the Atlantic, deep in the Guatemalan rainforest, Tikal once dominated the Maya lowlands as a powerful city-state. Between approximately 200–900 CE, Tikal rose as a political and ceremonial center, marked by towering pyramids, palaces, and plazas. Its prosperity depended on agricultural intensification, trade in obsidian and other goods, and a complex web of alliances and rivalries among Maya polities. Monumental inscriptions record dynastic lineages and military campaigns, revealing a highly stratified society. The so-called classic Maya collapse of the 9th century did not represent universal destruction, but rather widespread urban depopulation across parts of the southern lowlands. Evidence points to prolonged drought episodes, soil depletion, internecine warfare, and overextension of political systems. As agricultural productivity declined and conflict intensified, urban centers like Tikal were gradually abandoned. The rainforest reclaimed plazas and pyramids, concealing them for centuries. Here again, abandonment was not instantaneous. It was the cumulative outcome of ecological stress, intersecting with political fragmentation. These ancient cases differ in chronology and context, yet they converge on recurring themes. Wealth concentrated in urban form requires stable environmental systems, coherent governance, and adaptable economic networks. When climate destabilizes irrigation, when trade routes shift, when political authority fractures, cities begin to hollow from within. The process may be slow, but its consequences are irreversible. Ancient abandonment also reminds us that cities are not merely physical agglomerations of buildings. They are dynamic systems sustained by flows: water, food, labor, belief, and legitimacy. Interrupt those flows, and even monumental architecture cannot sustain habitation. Stone temples may endure, but social infrastructure dissolves. Unlike modern ghost cities, fenced off by military zones or radiation barriers, ancient abandoned cities often transitioned into sacred landscapes, archaeological sites, or sources of myth. Pompeii became a window into Roman life. Angkor evolved into a religious pilgrimage site, and later a symbol of national identity. Mohenjo-Daro and Tikal became subjects of scientific excavation, reshaping our understanding of early urbanism. Their abandonment did not erase their significance, it transformed it. As we approach the final phase of this documentary journey, we will examine how contemporary climate change, rising sea levels, and economic migration patterns are shaping the future of urban vulnerability, the secret history behind the wealthiest cities ever completely abandoned. Part 5: The Future of Abandonment. In the 21st century, cities no longer need volcanoes, invading armies, or collapsing empires to face the possibility of abandonment. The forces at work today are slower, more diffuse, and often harder to confront because they unfold in increments rather than explosions. Rising sea levels threaten coastal wealth. Demographic decline hollows out industrial regions. Financial systems inflate property markets beyond sustainable demand. The question is no longer whether prosperous cities can be emptied by catastrophe. It is whether gradual transformation can produce the same result quietly. In Italy, Venice has for centuries symbolized maritime wealth and architectural splendor. Yet recurrent flooding, known as acqua alta, has intensified alongside rising sea levels in the Adriatic. Despite massive engineering projects, such as the Meuse barrier system, long-term climate projections continue to raise concerns about sustainability. Venice is not abandoned, but its vulnerability illustrates how environmental stress can pressure even the most historically resilient urban centers. Across the Atlantic, parts of Miami confront similar realities. King tides increasingly flood streets during high water events, and rising insurance costs reshape real estate markets. Here, wealth remains visible in skyline towers and coastal development. Yet underlying risk calculations are shifting. When insurance becomes unaffordable and infrastructure costs escalate, population patterns may adjust accordingly. Abandonment in such contexts would not occur in a single moment. It would manifest through migration, property devaluation, and incremental retreat. In Southeast Asia, Jakarta faces a dual crisis of rising seas and land subsidence due to groundwater extraction. Large sections of the city are sinking at measurable rates. The Indonesian government has already initiated plans to relocate the national capital to Nusantara on Borneo, signaling an unprecedented acknowledgement that even major capitals may need strategic withdrawal from vulnerable geography. Meanwhile, in the American Midwest, cities like Detroit reveal a different pathway to urban hollowing. Once the epicenter of automobile manufacturing and one of the wealthiest cities in the United States, Detroit experienced severe population loss in the late 20th century due to industrial restructuring, suburbanization, and economic downturn. Entire neighborhoods emptied. Though revitalization efforts continue, the city's history demonstrates how economic transformation alone can leave behind landscapes of vacancy without natural disaster or war. These contemporary examples suggest that abandonment is evolving. It may no longer take the dramatic form of volcanic burial or nuclear exclusion zones. Instead, it may emerge from accumulated pressures: climate change, insurance economics, demographic aging, automation, capital flight. Wealth today is deeply intertwined with global financial systems, and when those systems recalibrate, urban life adjusts. History teaches that cities are living organisms sustained by flows of resources, people, and belief. When those flows weaken, architecture alone cannot preserve vitality. From Pompeii to Pripyat, from Angkor to Hiroshima, the pattern repeats: prosperity creates confidence. Confidence invites expansion. Expansion magnifies vulnerability, and vulnerability, when triggered, reveals how temporary permanence truly is. The wealthiest cities ever abandoned do not simply warn us about the past. They illuminate. When a wealthy city is abandoned, it does not vanish, it transforms. The markets close, the factories fall silent, the hotels darken, but the structures remain, and with them the evidence of what once seemed permanent. The true final chapter of every abandoned metropolis begins not with collapse, but with stillness. In Pripyat, the Ferris wheel stands motionless above an amusement park that never opened to the public. Apartment buildings decay in measured silence, their rooms exposed to wind and vegetation. The city was not undone by economic weakness, but by technological catastrophe. Its streets now function as a controlled historical landscape, a place where modern ambition collided with physical limits. Pripyat's abandonment did not erase its significance. It intensified it. In the desert air of Bodhi, wooden storefronts remain preserved in what officials call arrested decay. Gold once justified every plank and nail. When the ore diminished, belief followed. Today, Bodhi's wealth lies not underground but in memory. The town earns meaning rather than bullion, its silence curated rather than accidental. Along the Mediterranean, the high-rise skyline of Varosha still faces the sea. Balconies open to salt wind and political uncertainty. Tourism once generated immense revenue. Geopolitical rupture ended it almost overnight. The hotels were not dismantled, they were sealed. Abandonment here is not geological or financial, but diplomatic. The architecture waits, suspended between past luxury and unresolved sovereignty. And deep within Cambodia, the stone towers of Angkor rise above jungle canopy. Remnants of a hydraulic civilization that once sustained one of the largest urban populations of the pre-industrial world. Climate fluctuation, political realignment, and trade shifts gradually drained the system that fed it. The temples endure because stone endures. The urban life that animated them does not. Across continents and centuries, the pattern is unmistakable. Cities do not collapse because they lack wealth. They collapse because wealth is concentrated in systems that can fracture energy sources, political stability, climate balance, technological confidence, trade routes, financial credit. When those systems fail or evolve, infrastructure becomes excess, and permanence reveals itself as temporary. Yet the ruins are not merely warnings. They are archives. They record the height of human ambition, the scale of investment, the faith placed in continuity. They teach that resilience is not built from wealth alone, but from diversity, adaptability, and humility before geography and time. The wealthiest cities ever completely abandoned stand today as monuments not to failure, but to cycles. Prosperity rises. Confidence expands. Vulnerability accumulates. And when the balance shifts, departure follows, sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, but always decisively. In the end, the silence of abandoned streets is not empty. It carries a message repeated across millennia: no city, no matter how rich, is exempt from change. The question history leaves for us is not whether cities can be abandoned. It is whether we are willing to recognize the signals before the silence arrives.